Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to talk about Operation Touchdown. Operation Touchdown was our first Airsoft event of 2024. It's the third Airsoft event that we have hosted at Frontline Action over the course of the last few years. There was a really long intervening period where we didn't run any games. And recently, it's last year, we started again. And so it was, as a bit of a spoiler, it was a tremendous success. I think everyone, or most people, I should say, had a really good time.
Reviews have been positive.
Reviews have been positive. So we have a feedback survey that we submitted to the players. And we truly do want to get good constructive feedback from everyone, good, bad, and indifferent. And we did receive that. I mean, the vast majority of the feedback was good. But I'm excited to get talking about it because it was a bit of an atypical game. It's not the kind of game that we have really organized in the past. So I'm excited to get into it. First off, the weather was awful. I think we can, we'll just start off by saying this. So this event was held on June 1st, and June in Newfoundland is not awesome weather. It was a very rainy day, not a particularly warm day. I think we cracked
like
10 degrees
or something.
Yeah,
we did. Maybe somewhere you were on the field, it didn't crack 10 degrees where I was.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it was definitely chilly. Although I don't think the players minded the cold so much as just the rain.
Yeah, well, if you're playing, it's definitely not a big issue, relatively speaking, for it to be a little cold because you're moving around and like the cardio keeps you warm. I know I was frozen.
Yes, that's true. You were just standing at the spawn. Yeah.
That's a game staffing kind of thing. It happens. I'm not salty about it. It's just
yeah.
But like the weather notwithstanding, people had a fantastic time. And like that is what makes it worth for us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that I shared with all the participants is that this was the largest Airsoft event that I've ever run. And I don't think Frontline has hosted a larger Airsoft event than that in the past. Not that I can remember that I attended. We had, between all of the registered players for both teams, red and blue, as well as the Storm Riders who showed up to be the gold team that day, which I'll talk about in a second, we had 62 players, right? Which for us is tremendous. That's a huge number. And to be completely honest, I don't think the field can really handle that many more players.
We had 62, and we had, I think, 2 people who were sick. So like 64 sign up, 62 took the field plus you and I.
Yeah.
And like I think that's basically capacity. The field we play on is really good, but it's not enormous.
Yeah.
And with 60 players, it's like, oh yeah, this is like the gameplay model that we'd selected was intended to be more direct conflict all the time than some of the previous stuff we've run. And I think it worked really well. And part of the reason it worked really well was that with that many players, there's nowhere to not have direct conflict. Like,
yeah, that's exactly right.
Unless you are not on the line fighting, for your team, you're absolutely in it.
Yeah. And so I think just before we dive into it, talking to the field manager, our goal for the event was 50 with a bit of a stretch goal to 60. And we definitely hit that. So that was, for me, a really big thing. I think I mentioned to the players at the start and in my thank you post after the game, I've been involved in Airsoft since 2006 here in Newfoundland. And I never imagined that the community would grow to an event of that size. I've heard feedback from players who attended that, they don't typically play that many games throughout the year, but hopefully we've converted a few regulars. For many players, this was their first experience at an Airsoft event, which is kind of good because it was relatively straightforward. Just go there and shoot the bad guys is pretty much the order of operations for the day. So I think on that front alone, it was very successful. And I couldn't be happier with the player turnout. I think that was really great.
Yeah, some of the like big wins for me in terms of that specifically. So I know we had a couple of players who showed up with sidearms, right? Like they are players who played at the indoor over the winter, who've never played at the outdoor, literally,
Hmm.
or who were just like, yeah, I thought this pistol was cool, so I bought it and I'm here to play Airsoft. And after the game, they were players I was really like, I hope they had a good time, because like playing on a larger field with a bunch of people with, AEGs when you're running a GBB pistol with one mag is like, ooh, that's a big ask to have fun, or at least it feels to me like it would be. Like that
Yeah.
feels daunting. And they had a good time.
Yeah.
So like we got to be doing something right.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit about like what this game was all about. So what we decided to run, as Patrick mentioned, was really sort of like an area control, real estate control um, type of game where there are no like side missions. There aren't things to distract you. There's no role playing. It's really just about teamwork and area control. And we wanted to do that because
Welcome to
both
the
the
real estate
games,
business, boys.
yeah, both the games we had done previously were really just about were like they were about, yeah, real estate control, but also more than that, different gameplay mechanics. So in Operation Last Refuge Spore Cloud, in Spore Cloud we had it was asymmetric. So we had the village, and then we had one team that was much smaller, but on the outskirts basically. And in Last Refuge 2, it was all about the village, control of the village, working, RPing with the villagers, all this kind of stuff with lots of missions, etc. And so
And I
this
know,
game we wanted to do no missions, just direct combat, and see what people how people adapted to it, how they coordinated for teamwork, because that was going to be really crucial for the day, and really just focused on the teams, to just leaving them to their own devices, right?
and with a bit of emphasis on like trying to like there's nothing you can do with the field we have to make it so that the village doesn't end up in play other than saying no going in the village.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to try to design the objective layout for the zone control and stuff, and the spawns, to make it so that it wouldn't be completely the focal point of play.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we were moderately successful at that part.
Yeah, so like Pat was saying, our field wasn't very huge, and we had 5 control points, and they were pretty well spread out. One control point near both of the teams, like spawn zone, so it would be easier for them to hold that, and then 3 of them roughly in the middle, which they would fight throughout the day for. And in addition to that mechanic, we bolted on the touchdown mechanic, which was really the name of the game. But what was basically about taking the Storm Riders team from one side of the field, so your start zone, to your end zone, and to score a touchdown with them. Chaz had suggested that we put them in referee jerseys, which ultimately we decided that was not going to go. But it was a good suggestion nonetheless.
I really like the idea.
That being said, so that was the objective of the game, to score these touchdowns in an effort to build a juggernaut, which your team would unlock. And on paper, that was a really great idea. Practically speaking, though, what we discovered as we continued to play is that the game was pretty lopsided. And so the team that ultimately would win the juggernaut would not be the team that really needed it. And we'll talk about the specifics of why later.
Yeah,
but I think
the team that was, we had envisioned this as a game mode where there'd be a lot of back and forth, and where play would be very balanced, where
close.
where the teams would sort of score a very equal or very close to equal number of points. As it turns out, that was less than the case.
Yeah, on the day of. It certainly could have been, but it was less than that on the day of. And so I think if I were to do it again, or if you're thinking about organizing something like that as a game in your area, what I probably would do now is to say, well, if you score, let's say 4 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns, you win. So when you score your third one, the other team gets a juggernaut to help them come back, right? Something of that nature. Regardless, that was the main mechanic, was basically doing these touchdowns to get the juggernaut. And then once you got the juggernaut, the other team would get a mission to get the anti-juggernaut weapon, which in this version was my M72 Law, which was fun in and of itself for one of the teams.
Yeah, just the fact that a bunch of players, I think, were really enthused about that, just simply because they got to like see and play around with one.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not a common piece of kit.
Yeah.
So I think an error we made in designing this, that in retrospect I kind of find funny, is like we talked about trying to make it less milsim-y, less LARP-y than our previous ones, because we wanted to see how people would approach that. and because I don't feel that we were unsuccessful with our previous cracks at doing that, but like we both felt the community maybe wasn't all there for it.
Yeah.
And I know we've gotten some feedback saying like, oh, we wanted more LARP stuff, which is cool to hear,
Yes.
right? More
Yeah.
milsim, please, is definitely a thing we hoped to hear. But it's interesting that we sat down when we designed the Juggernaut mechanics. You and I think both were thinking about it from kind of a like, oh, like so the winning team's putting together pieces of the Juggernaut, so like it's a reward for them for winning.
Mm-hmm.
When the thing you just described of, well, the winning team is going to get the Juggernaut, wait, didn't really cross my mind, and I don't think it crossed yours in terms of a like, oh, hey, we've created a thing where the team that's losing is going to start losing harder.
Yes.
And that's us following a narrative line when we meant not to follow any narrative lines and creating a mechanical problem by doing so.
Yeah.
And like that's not a fault.
Yeah.
It's just a like, huh, yep.
And I think in my mind, like the day was going to be really close, and then the Juggernaut would just help one team sort of push it over the edge on their side. And unfortunately, that's not what really ended up happening. I think one of the recurring themes that we have with all the games is that the start time appears to continue to be an issue for people, which is to say, many players are able to organize themselves and to attend the game at the right time and show up on time and be prepared to hit the field on time. But for other players, that continues to be a challenge. And unfortunately, those players play on a team and that team needs them. And because our community is so small, even a 60-player game is not very big. If you have 5 people or 10 people who don't take the field at the start of the game, that's a problem.
Yeah. And
so,
I mean, especially if it's as it was in this case. And frankly, I think in all the games that we've run at Frontline over the last while, like there's been this issue of, so we want to start on time. We want to encourage people to, we want to reward people for being able to read a watch and showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense to me. And we simultaneously have a problem where, even though we've literally said that in the briefings, where Phil has posted, like the notes and a video where he goes through the notes and everything you could reasonably expect, and then some, frankly, we still get players going like, oh, I didn't know that. And there's got to be a point where you go, well, what do you want us to do?
Yeah. And it's funny because one of the players were like, well, you should delay the start of the games to make sure that people take the field on time, or we have enough players to start, which is a great suggestion, and actually is exactly what we ended up doing on the day of. Like our game whistle was supposed to blow at 9. I contacted the blue team commander around when the game was supposed to go, and he was like, well, I don't have enough players, like we're still waiting. I'm like, okay, cool, we'll delay. So we actually ended up delaying the game by 15 minutes anyway, and that's also what we did the first time around. And it's just not enough time. So I think the reality is we also don't have an unlimited time slot at Frontline for these events. Like we have a 6-hour window from 9 to 3, which allows them to host these games, but also gives them time in the afternoon/evening to run any other rentals, to make up for lost income, etc. Right? So I think the arrangement is more than fair, and 6 hours is more than enough playtime because, as we've experienced, most players can't handle 6 hours of continuous play. Like they get tired very quickly. So we're not really sure exactly what the solution to that problem is. However, it continues to be an issue that teams don't take the field at the time, and the team that is more organized when it comes to taking the field at the time and starting the game on time ends up with a huge advantage right off the gate. And again, that happened this game.
And like I think a definite factor there that I only really grasped sort of like sitting back and thinking about the people who showed up late, is that some of those players are people who are reliant on other folks for rides, right? We do have a larger population of 14, 16-year-old players than I'm used to thinking about, which is awesome. Like, community growth is fantastic. Now, I'm not sure that means we should adjust the start time or that it means that we should adjust how we're dealing with this. Mm-hmm. It's just a thing to try to think about when we're planning the next one in that sense.
Yeah. I think, and this was also compounded by the fact that when it comes to the team's experience level and balance, that there was also some issues there, because from an organizer standpoint, what we try and do is balance the teams numerically as much as possible, because frankly, I don't know everybody in the community. Mike doesn't know everybody in the community, nor do you. So when we have 60 players on a roster, you definitely know some of them, and I definitely do. But the vast majority of them, I don't necessarily know who they are. Like, yes, I know who Sasha is. I know who Jack is. Right? Like, I know who Brandon is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can know pockets of people, but even still, like, I don't necessarily know or think about how experienced or good that player is.
Well, especially in this
Yeah.
case, when, like we're adding to that or compounding that with the fact that, like I said, 10, 20 people who were there predominantly have played at the indoor over the winter
Mm-hmm.
or at the indoor generally, or a bunch have just never played before,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, we do our best to get out to like, 2 games a month, 3 games a month if we can manage it. Um, we're not going to know everyone.
Yeah.
So the skill balancing aspect, is challenging. And like honestly, also, some of the other games we've run, it mattered less. Like
Yeah.
the average competency of the players on team could be offset by being, young and inclined to sprint around, or being good at talking to our NPCs, stuff like that, that was valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here we have, a really direct, like, this is basically I don't think we intended it to be as much a go to the middle of the field and shoot at one another game as it became.
Yeah.
Um, but fundamentally, if it's a go to the middle of the field and shoot at one another game, the folks who have, more reps on their replicas, who have better replicas, who have practiced, moving and playing as unit, like, if you have 6 guys who've actually practiced, doing fix and flank stuff with, as 2 fire teams of 3, they're going to work really effectively into even a significant outnumbering
Mm-hmm.
um, opposing force who doesn't know how to do that.
And we saw that dynamic play out extremely well, in addition to the coordination aspect of things, because when the Storm Riders were rolling with the red team, well, the red team had control of the field predominantly, so it was very easy for them to push across the field. Um, and then then the blue team was relatively penned in because they couldn't do a whole lot, because in order to get the Storm Riders across the field, the red team decided, okay, well, we're just going to take as much control of the field as we can, which makes it trivial for us to move them across the field. Great, score a touchdown.
The
Then Storm
surprise to
Riders
us
go,
was that they could do that effectively.
yeah, but
Like,
then the Storm Riders would go to the blue team, and so the red team was really getting hit hard. The red team was hitting the blue team really really hard and getting them penned in, and blue team was having difficulty getting traction. But then when you put the Storm Riders with them and got them to coordinate their fire and move around the field more effectively, they were able to press out and push out of their start zone and get halfway up the field and so on, push red back to their spawn and stuff like that. But that takes time. Like, you can't just flick of the switch, just get that done. And so then halfway through the push or 3/4 of the way through the push, then the timer would run out and the Storm Riders would have to switch sides again, at which point the blue team would lose their gains and get pushed back, and so on. But the fact that they were able to push out like that was due simply to the fact, especially throughout the beginning of the game, that they were being guided and supported in a way that ET, the commander of the blue team, was doing his best, but he was only one guy. So
and
his span of control on the team was not was not as good as having 5 or 6 or 7 Storm Riders coordinating a vast body of people, right?
well, and
No matter if they're
especially
beginners or not.
and especially when, like, really what's happening there is he's being given team leads who can lead chunks of his team for
Yeah,
him and carry out what he's trying to do, whereas previously he's trying to juggle both being in charge of an entire team and having a plan for the whole team on the go, and also being a combat leader for like individual chunks of his force at the same time, which
yeah.
is quite difficult to do. And like, I also feel like there was a balance where red ended up having more radios and more ability to like communicate via means other than yelling at one another.
Yeah, certainly, certainly they did, and
um,
more. They had the one Legion Milsim group there, so Chiefs guys, and they play together all the time. Like they're more familiar with that kind of stuff, and they're very objective focused. So they would go and they would get on an objective and they would entrench and hold it, and they were very effective at doing that. And
Yeah,
they
I mean,
didn't need to push because they would just wait for the enemy to start presenting themselves, and they would schwack them, and then that would be the end of it. And it's not until
yeah,
the blue team
that
was
sounds like
able
a good
to,
plan to me. Like,
yeah, well, exactly. And it's not until the blue team could mount like a focused, concentrated attack that they were able to break out of that. One of the other challenges too with the blue team is that because of the weather and because of how everything was set up, they decided to have their spawn in the only covered area on that area of the field, which is sensible. However, really they should have been spawning in the woods where they couldn't be seen, they couldn't be spawn capped, which would have given them the ability to move along the backside of the field and surprise red more than they did. But that did not happen really, except for the few times where I gave a blue team an exceptional respawn outside of the respawn timer rotation and specifically told them to go spawn in the woods to see if that would help them sort of break out of that cycle of just sort of being stuck where they were. And that was largely effective, but they didn't keep doing that. They didn't keep going back there at time after time after time. So it was definitely like there's a mismatch of experience for sure, both in terms of airsofting experience, like you were saying, like just getting into firefights, which you need to know how to do, but also like playing the game, right? And understanding that you don't need to go to the meat grinder every single time. Like if you're leaving your spawn and going into the village and just getting killed, don't just go
yeah,
back to spawn and do the same thing again next time. Like
it turns out doing that over and over isn't effective. And like, in fairness to the players who were doing that over and over in some cases, a lot of them were newer players and a lot of them were going, well, like, I got shot in the face, my adrenaline's up, I'm going to go get that guy. And, I respect in a lot of ways, like I can get that. But that's not necessarily effective in terms of creating, a game-winning play approach.
Yeah. And it's hard too because you also the weather's not great and you're getting frustrated. So it's hard to make and I mean to Red's credit as well. Like they also they complied with all of the game rules and changes that we requested throughout the day. Okay, let's pull out of the village a little bit. Let's give them a bit of space. Like all this,
Yeah, in
don't
fact,
spawn camp.
yeah, in
Right?
fact, they proactively suggested some stuff in a like effort to be like, hey, we want to make this fun for everyone, and like we feel
Yeah,
like we're pushing it a bit hard here.
yeah.
So
And
like
so
props to that. And Blue did have fun, right? Like that's one of the big things that we gotta mention, I think,
yeah,
as a
and they, I mean,
positive.
firstly, they were able to score a touchdown. So there was one point in the game where the timing was really good, where they were able to the blue team was able to decimate the red team. They all went to respawn, and the respawn timer was basically maximum. So they had as much time as possible, and they were able to take control of the entire field.
Yep.
They took control of the entire field, but unfortunately, they weren't able to hold it. And so, again, this is a situation where you need to make a strategic decision at that time to be like, okay, hang on. All of their team basically is gonna respawn in 5 minutes. How do we set ourselves up to be able to actually withstand a push from their whole team from the spawn zone, short of just putting a machine gun in the spawn door and just lighting it up for the next like 5 minutes? And
Which
lack of experience, lack of coordination, whatever, lack of radios made it very difficult for the blue team to do that. And so when the red team respawned, they took a couple casualties coming out the door, but then they were able to slowly encroach and within the next 20 minutes had taken basically all the ground that blue had made up,
and
which
like
is unfortunate,
and
right?
like in a props to Blue kind of way, like Blue did pull back so that they weren't on the objective that would have given them line of fire on the red spawn point there. And like that's wicked sportsmanship. Like
Mhm.
that's really really good. That might be okay, we need to think about those objectives differently next time. Partly because as it turns out, if you have an objective next to Blue spawn that Blue always holds and an objective next to red spawn that red always holds, maybe we don't need those two.
Yeah, agree. I
um
definitely would agree with that.
but that's oh yeah, we tried that, okay, yep. Plan B.
Yeah. And
Live and learn.
so I think ultimately, like Red, obviously they had a great day. They felt like they were doing great because they were extremely coordinated. They were rolling, right? And blue had a much more frustrating time, though I think that, as you mentioned, it is important to mention that the blue team also had fun. I think what ended up happening, without going too far into the future, but there came a point with about an hour left in the game and probably only 3% of our clothes dry on our bodies, where we looked at the score and said, well, mathematically, it is impossible for blue to win. So I asked the red commander, I'm like, hey, if the blue team doesn't want to carry on anymore, are you okay with that? And they said, yeah, of course. If they don't want to keep playing, because I'm like, you guys have won. There's no way for them to come back from
Yeah.
this. What do you want to do? And so I went to the blue team. I talked to the commander and I said, hey, listen, if your team no longer wants to carry on, mathematically they cannot win. So do you want me to make that suggestion to them? Do you think they will welcome it? What do you think? And he said, well, just I think you should suggest it to them. So I asked him. I said, hey, so guys, what do you want to do here? Do you want to keep playing because you can't win? If you're having fun and you want to play on, well, then we will. But if you want to call it now, nobody's going to hold it against you. And most of the players on the blue box were like, no, we're having fun. We want to play on. But can we have the juggernaut? That was basically their byline. And I was like, you know what? That seems like a completely fair request, especially given the fact that we realized that red team really did not need it.
Especially given that we feel that red team shouldn't have the juggernaut.
Yeah.
Checks out. Carry on. Right.
So there was one small group of there's one team on the blue, one of the sub teams on the blue team. I think they're called the Rats. They were like, no, we're done. We don't want to keep playing. I was like, okay. But as soon as they said that, their team was like, no, they'll keep playing. They'll keep playing. I was like, all right, fair enough. So I went back to the red team and I said, hey, the blue team wants to continue, but maybe we'll give them to Juggernaut. What do you guys think? And they, to their credit again, said, we were just talking about that. It makes sense for them to have it. And then we'll get the anti-Juggernaut weapon and we'll go try and hunt it and see what's what. And I said, okay, great. That's exactly what we did. So I sent Josh, our Juggernaut, with the full like mandible situation on his helmet and whatnot, to the blue team. And they had some fun with that. Like he had music playing from his Juggernaut suit. And so they rolled around. He was walking because he's the Juggernaut, hip firing his 249 or whatever it is, machine gun that he was using. And then I let that go for about 15, 20 minutes or so. And that was fine. Blue was, doing whatever they could. And then he got like probably partway up to like the bus field or something like that. So, good like 60% across the field. And then I gave the red team the law. I showed them how to use it, the M72 law. I didn't give them the law, but I guess they laid down the law, as we will say. One of the players took it, and I escorted the player down the field until he got close enough to Josh. And what was really funny is that like Josh in his Juggernaut suit was looking right at him or in his direction. And I'm like, you're going to have to get closer. And he's like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And Josh turned around. He's turned his back completely to that guy. So the guy moved up a piece of cover, poked the law around the corner, and he said, I'm going to fire it now. I'm like, okay, cool. Josh, you're done. And so that was the end of that. But it was a really cool moment. And for that player in particular and the guys who were around him, they were like, yeah, that was cool. I like that. So it was, I think after that happened, after the Juggernaut was destroyed and everyone like sort of came down from that, that's when we decided, you know what, like that, we'll end the game now. There's no real point in continuing.
Note,
yeah.
And I think in fairness also that like the folks who left may have left because they were cold and wet more so than because they weren't like enjoying the game.
And I definitely had a chance to talk to a few people who were leaving, and some of them were renters, right? It was their first time playing Airsoft, and they were like, that was enough Airsoft for me for today. And they'd been there for like 3 hours. I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely legitimate.
Legit.
Maybe this wasn't what you signed up for or whatever, but like, yeah, I get it. But I was talking to the group, like the Rats who are leaving, and they're like, it really has nothing to do. Like, we're having fun, but at the same time, like we're cold and wet. And if we can't win, like there's no sense in us continuing, which I totally get as well, right?
Exactly,
that's fair.
Right, But like I guess the piece I wanted to note there was like, I also had a chat with some of them as they were coming off the field, and they weren't pissed. Like they weren't like, oh, this sucked for the most part.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, I'm going to go get warm now. Bye.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and justifiable.
Yeah. I think none of the feedback that we've received to date anyway has been negative. So in the feedback survey that we asked, it's like, overall, I would play an event like this one in the future. Overall, I had a good time. Like overall, I feel the organizers did as much as they could to make sure we had fun. Like all these questions, The worst like that we got was a neither agree or nor disagree with that statement. Most of them are either agree or completely agree. So I think
Solid.
that speaks to a lot. That speaks a lot to how overly satisfied people are. Now that doesn't mean that there's no space for improvement. Obviously there is.
Definitely.
But I think they definitely was successful. And again, given the weather, those guys, even the last game, like the last game was wet, right? Operation Last Refuge Sport Cloud was wet. This game was also wet. It would be really great if we could have a game that was in dry conditions. Like that would be
it's
pretty
certainly
sweet.
one of those, like, it turns out that running our season opener and ender at the beginning and end of the Airsoft season here and means running them in like crummy weather.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think at the end, I mean, we got a group photo, which is just a really tremendous group, and even, there's more people who weren't even in that picture, which is great. I think too, like the Storm Riders. So the Storm Riders gold team, right? They were basically doing work all day long. Like they would go back and forth, switching between teams
we
consistently,
we
right?
we took you guys at your word when you said that you wanted to get more trigger time this all.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that was unfortunate is that because they spent so much time on the field, they were exposed to more things. And I don't want to say more danger, but certainly Steph rolled his ankle and then kept playing and then rolled that same ankle again. And at that point, he sort of packed it in and he was like, you know what, I'm kind of done.
And that's
Uh,
completely reasonable. Like,
Kirby has a heart condition, so like he played as much as he could, and then his personal care attendant was like, "Yeah, your vitals are not great. You need to take a lie
yeah,
down." So that was fine.
just, you're
And
gonna
he was
chill out
very
for a
much,
bit. And he was like,
yeah,
I don't wanna. And she was like, I'm not asking.
yeah. But that being said, I mean, he was very much like, "Put me back out there, coach," but there was no way. And then Jeremy was wearing a paintball mask, and he got shot through the paintball mask into his tooth and chipped a tooth. So he had to. He decided to go and take off and go try and find a dentist as soon as possible.
Again, like,
Which is legitimate. And
occupational hazard, and also, ugh.
so throughout the day, the gold team sort of the numbers got whittled down a little bit. So by the end of it, um, it was Josh and John and Matt and Jason. So they were -3. Regardless, I think all of them had a lot of fun. John was saying it was like this was the most fun he's had in an op. Presumably because it's the most that he's ever shot in an op. Most of those guys are out of BBs now.
Yeah. On a related
Yeah.
note, we were doing a BB order. Huh. Who knew?
Yeah, so it is really tremendous. I think overall, like I'm just very. I'm also really happy that we were able to find a way to incorporate the Storm Riders and allow them to play without making people feel like it's unfair. Because I think the challenge is we would never really be able to play an op like that as a group without either severely stacking the teams against us, in which case, like in this game, it might have been, 20 on 40 or something like that, or it would have to be, right? 7 of us plus 13 other people, and then everybody else against them, right?
And folks aren't necessarily interested in playing that. Like, I think it'd be fairly easy to talk some of our guys into it. But like, other players maybe a little less so.
Yeah, and again, like we're not trying to make an experience where we just roll. Like that's not fun for us. Like we want to create a challenge. But again, like if you have to find other players who are willing to take on that challenge as well. I'm sure 40 guys versus 20, like if you're on the 40 side, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, sure, that's fine." But who else are you putting with us who are willing to, sacrifice basically their weekend to get shot at by 40 different people? Like that's a lot.
Yep.
So I'm glad that we were able to find a format that allows us to be utilized and useful, but in a way that's balanced for everybody, right? Because I think, yeah,
I think the the 3-team format worked really well. Like that's definitely a piece that everyone seemed to have fun with. Everyone seemed fine with it. I was a little concerned that there'd be sort of like, confusion over the day where like a team would be like, "Oh, I don't know what team the Storm Riders are on, and I'm not sure if I should be shooting at them," kind of stuff. And that just was not an issue
at all. Yeah.
Which was great. I was really happy that didn't occur and didn't end up posing a problem.
Mm-hmm. And the feedback from the players, it has been positive as well. Like everyone said that they enjoyed they enjoyed sort of the touchdown mechanic, like having the Storm Riders there, and that they felt that it was largely felt that it was fair, like equal opportunity for both teams, which
Good.
I would certainly hope so, because that's exactly how it worked, right? Like they until the Juggernaut was finished, until the other team scored a touchdown, that team didn't get them again because they got them permanently because the other team got the Juggernaut, right? So like that I think is that I think worked really well ultimately. So I'm glad about that. I think where we have opportunities for improvement, one of the big things that we've heard from players, Pat talked about it a little bit at the start, is they do want the RP, they do want the mission. So we didn't have that by design this game. It's not because that Pat and I were lazy, although it was nice not having to create missions, but that's beside the point. It was we did not want to do that. We wanted to have a game that did not feature those things as distractions, to let the players just do their thing. And largely the community has said that they actually would rather a balance of area control and missions slash RP. So that doesn't mean we're going to do one over the other, but I think if we were to look at this game format exactly the same way again, what would we change? Well, we would figure out a way to include missions on top of the Storm Riders touchdown mechanic. I think that would certainly be well received based on the feedback that we got from
Yeah,
from
and
the
that's not,
community.
like it's a little bit of extra work for us, but it's by no means, cripplingly difficult.
No, definitely not.
So I feel really positively about that as a even better if, in that
Yeah.
it's, I think people are like, yeah, we wanted this. And it's cool to me because we put in a lot of work the last two times putting it in, and we were like, people didn't engage with this as much as we'd hoped or in the ways that we'd expected necessarily. So I'll be honest, I was sort of like, well, I guess they don't want it that much. And getting the feedback that, like, no, that was a good and valued thing, even if we didn't engage with it the way that you guys thought we were going to, is like, oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that feels good.
So I do think that next time we will include missions. And I don't know if we're going to include like RP quite as much, because that does require actors and stuff. And I'd rather have people playing. But I definitely think that having missions to shape what's going on the battlefield, to give teams opportunities, would absolutely be very helpful. I think well, the Juggernaut is a good example. Like we could build it so that you get the Juggernaut some other way, or it's not based on the, as I was mentioning, like maybe once one team gets 3 touchdowns, the other team gets the Juggernaut, right? So to help,
and
whatever that looks like,
and it allows
give
us
them
to,
other stuff to do.
well, and it allows us to go, okay, so we have a primary scoring mechanic, here's a secondary scoring mechanic, right? Which in the past has also helped balance things out, in that a team that was getting, stomped on could try to like move some of their focus to doing secondary objectives and get points that way and feel progression and be successful, even though they weren't necessarily winning sort of the main firefight.
I think too, we're trying as well the black bandage medic. So like the special medic bandages in addition to buddy aid. The feedback on that has been really great, and I do think that it adds a lot of value. So I think people really didn't like overall the painkillers mechanic that we were using before, like with the candy, like the self revive. But I think the special medic bandage is a good middle ground on that. It's like, yeah, you can get help, but also it's limited. So you only have 5 per medic, or however many your commander gave you. And so I think that's something we want to absolutely include in future iterations as well, because it was very effective. And the regular buddy aid bandage medic bandage system, I think, works really well. We don't need a special medic for that. I think having anyone who can apply a bandage, your own bandage to you, is more than fine. So that was good. Yeah,
I think that created both the right amount of nuance. The medic having their own second bandage, so you could revive someone a second time if you were a medic. Like that created interesting nuance in that, it made it so that we had players who were playing medics who got to go, well, normally I would be, up in the front of things, but because I'm the medic, I'm going to play differently. I'm going to play a game differently so that I can be more useful in that role, without having any negative stuff come out of it. Whereas like the painkillers, etc., were a really fun mechanic, in the sense of like entertaining, but perhaps not in the sense of utilitarian.
Well, and I think for people, it was just kind of like the perception of it was kind of unfair. Like, so you're shooting at a guy, in a bunker, and he's got like five painkillers on him. So you shoot him, and he puts his hand up. Then he eats a bunch of painkillers, and the second, next second he's shooting at you again. You're like, what the hell? Like, I just shot this guy.
Yep.
And so you kind of have to assume that they have painkillers, but I can see
Yeah,
that
no,
frustration.
I can understand
Yeah.
why you'd play that and have that be a feels bad.
Yeah.
You know,
I think you're also right. Like, we need to think about the placement of capture points on the field, because fundamentally nobody went on the D-Day on the Blackhawk field at all that game. There was no recourse for them to. There was nothing up there. They could score a touchdown up there, but like, why would they? Like, it was the most. You have to pass through one of the most defensible areas on the field to get there, so it's unlikely that you would go up there. So in future, we need to think about mechanics that force players to exploit that part of the field in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because, as we've already articulated, the field is, for 60 players, it's not a huge field.
Yeah, so we need to use every single square part of that field to make sure that we maximize the benefit. So that, I think, is also something we need to think about for the next design. And I think one final piece has to be perhaps abstracting some mechanics that allow us to give teams off field advantages. Like, blue team could have done a lot better if they had been given special tools like, oh, you know what? You've got a paradrop where you can just go and get some of your players and insert them anywhere on the field now, right? Or you have access to artillery every hour. You get an artillery strike that you can put wherever you want, clear out some players to help you out. And you have access to that because of something that you did. And like, on one hand, it's cheesy if the ref just says, oh yeah, artillery just happened because we need to clear. Like, that to me kind of sucks. But if a team earned the right to use that, then it's different, right? Yep. It's not the ref balancing. It's, okay, the team is going to take advantage of this right now. Here we go. So I think we need to abstract some mechanics like that to allow the teams to create opportunities to exploit, because
and that falls back into the having secondary objectives works really well for that.
Yeah, 100%.
Because it's a way for us to give out, stuff that adjusts gameplay.
Advantages. Because I do think that ultimately where the lack of experience comes in, especially in Airsoft in general, as I've seen, is the inability to exploit an advantage that you have just created. So we see this a lot where you're shooting at a guy behind cover and you tag him, and then he's like, I'm hit, and he goes off to respawn, and you just sit there. You've just created an advantage. You need to exploit that.
Yep.
Right? And we saw this a lot. And I mean, it's not to anybody's fault, right? It's the reality is, if you're not sure how to play, you don't have a lot of experience and so on, like, you create this opportunity and then you don't exploit it.
Yeah,
well,
if you're playing your first or second or third game of Airsoft, and you take out, a guy on the enemy team, you've created a hole you can push into. If you're Phil and I, you know that and you do it, right?
Yeah, or you push someone to do that. But if you don't know, then So
and,
I think
it's very logical to be in that situation and go, well, I've successfully, killed a guy. That's progress for my team. Where I am worked, so I'm going to stay here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, to come to the point about like having all these tools, like, it's one thing to have the tools. I think that you want to give them the tools, but also explain to them, like, this is for you to exploit. Like, you do this to do something else, right? It's not an end in itself.
Yep.
I think too, there's definitely, like, just from an organizational standpoint, there's several things that would make sense to do again. I like the idea of the pre-night check-in safety brief, where all we're going to continue, was very well attended this time. I got good feedback on the stream that we did, the rules live stream. That was really good. So I will continue to do that. Having players just check in the morning and be given their armband and given their bandage and then sent on their way, or chronoed, I think also we will continue to do that, like having a check-in table.
I kind of want to expand on that from like an organizational point of view and make it like a little more flowchart-y, in the sense that, like, I have a couple of, like, Walmart fold-out table kind of dealies, and I think that having a separate, so first you line up, you come here, you check in, you get your armband and your bandage, then you go there and you line up for chrono, and you get chronoed and checked off by that by a separate person.
Yeah.
Would have been more efficient than what ultimately happened for a chunk of the sign-in was just like one person doing both.
Yeah, I agree.
And mostly that's just it bottlenecked things a little, and I think it probably would have helped a little bit with just like getting everyone on the field quicker. But it also, having two people doing it as two separate stations with the first station directing you to the second one would have made it a little more controlled, and I think it would just have made our information management at the beginning of the day easier.
Yeah, I think one of the only challenges that I had is that people would check in just wearing whatever shirt, and it's like, yeah, but we're going to tape your arm now, so right. So having fabric uh, armbands, that's something I'm going to be talking to Mike about because I think that's a worthwhile investment. So it's like, here's your armband, here's your bandage. You have to return both of them at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Like that would be very helpful.
I think like whether that's a thing Frontline spends money on or a thing we end up looking into, just purchasing for future games. I don't know what it's going to cost, but I feel like they're going to have to be treated as being semi-consumable.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
in the sense that if we'd done blue team, red team, and gold team bandages for this one, or badges, whatever.
Yeah.
The only armbands I'm sure we would have gotten all of back are the gold team ones. And realistically, I'm sure two of them would be in someone's kit, but like we'd at least have gotten them all back because we can go, hey man, give me that back. And that's not, a crack at the blue teams. It's just I can only be sure of that because I know where those players live and I will go to their house and get it if I have to.
Yeah, correct.
So I think it's one of those things where we won't see a huge diminish, but we will see the number of them we have go down every time.
And kudos to some red players. They showed up with their own armbands already on. So great.
Yeah, one guy showed up with all 4 limbs.
yeah. I mean,
Righteous.
It's overkill, but that's great.
Yeah, dedication.
So that's one thing. The other thing that kind of happened accidentally, but I was talking to the field manager, I had something we want to do on the night before the event. So after the safety brief, the blue commander ET stuck around, or it could have been the night before, and he spent an hour on the field building fortifications, and not like out of cardboard. He built fortifications out of like scrap wood, pallets, whatever, moving stuff
out
around
of stuff on the field. Yeah, no, and
so
is rad.
Mike suggested that actually next time we do that. We say, hey, come to the safety brief, do your thing, etc. And then after, you can stick around for an hour and you can modify parts of the field to benefit your team. And if none of your team show up, well, then that's fine. But if all of your team show up, you're probably going to be able to do a bit more work than if it's just 1 or 2 people. So it's an opportunity for that team to figure their stuff out ahead of time.
That's cool. I
think that's going to make a big difference.
I really like that that's a thing Mike is down for. I'm not shocked. Like, he's super chill to work with.
I mean, it's free labor in a way, right?
Right. But like, it's also some of it's stuff he's going to have to undo.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, so that's certainly one thing. And I think ultimately the biggest lesson for us is coming down to team balance and what we're going to do next time. Figuring out a way to balance the teams, but also figuring out a way to do it early enough that teams can start strategizing ahead of time, because this time the roster wasn't even locked until Thursday, 2 nights before the event. So if you were planning on doing any strategizing and then you find out that one person moved to the other team, like that's difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think we didn't feel it was as big an issue in that the scenario was much simpler mechanically.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. But I think in future, especially if there's going to be missions involved and stuff like that, like we're trying to add back in some of the complexity that we took out, it's going to have to be, the rosters for the teams are going to have to be fixed. And so we're going to have to work with the players ahead of time to understand, okay, well, what makes sense, like in terms of fairness and stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
we'll get that figured out.
Some tinkering with that will have to occur, and ultimately a lot of this boils down to, we're trying new stuff and we want to intentionally be trying new stuff so that the players don't get bored and so that we don't get bored trying to organize and run the same thing too much.
Yeah.
But that also means that we're going to run into, should have thought of that every time. But, people had fun. I had fun, right? I mostly was just sort of hanging out and making sure the rules were understood and answering rules questions was my primary function, and like giving out spare stuff when people lost things. But, people had a laugh. I got to have a chat with a lot of people who were having a really good time. And I definitely put it all in the win column. I think it was a good day. I think it was a day well spent for me and hopefully for you. You know,
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, one of the key things, and we talked about this a lot, we've talked about it on previous episodes, like it's all about feedback, right? Like you need to get feedback from the people in your community in order to deliver more things that they enjoy, or to mitigate issues that they find were unenjoyable, right? We talked about that I think a couple weeks ago, right? Like if stuff is not to your liking, if stuff is frustrating you, if you're not happy with the way certain things work on the field, and you need to express that to the people who can make decisions. And so getting feedback from the community, like, yes, in some ways if we get negative feedback, it kind of stings, because it's like, oh man, like we put in so much effort, and we wanted this to work really well. And then you can kind of take that personally, but then you have to sort of see the forest from the trees and realize that actually none of the feedback is truly negative. Most of it that is not positive is at the very least constructive, except for that one time that someone was like, "Oh, don't let the Storm Riders run games," which is like, come on, bro. But I digress. Most of it was like, "Hey, so these are things that you can fix. These are things that I didn't find very fun that I think would be better if you change them." And like all of that is actionable. Now, whether or not we actually do something with it largely will depend on if it's only one person saying it or if we're hearing it a lot. And the stuff that we're hearing about more often is likely the stuff we're going to action first because it's
yeah, I mean,
probably a bigger problem,
and the stuff
right?
that's the stuff that is repeated in the feedback, and also the stuff that's easier to action.
Yeah.
Like if you look at us
Some
and
person asked for us to control the weather, which I don't think that's going to
yeah,
happen.
I mean, I've been working on that for a while, but the sacrifices aren't working, so we're gonna have to start like the mad science approach, I guess. I don't know,
Yeah. Somebody get Elon Musk on the phone.
right? But um, there's also just a feasibility of like sometimes people suggest like, oh yeah, no, it'd be great if you guys had a minigun. I agree.
Yeah.
Please buy for Pat.
Yeah.
you know,
Or like suggestions for scenarios which are just not feasible. Like people are like, oh, we'd love to do a World War II game. Yeah, but there's no community for that, right? So
we know that was you, Johnny.
it actually, I don't believe it was. So
Wicked.
like, yeah, I think like you're gonna choose what feedback you respond to, and especially I think if you're listening to this and you're organizing games yourselves and you're asking for feedback, remember like you don't have to action or take personally anything or like any of it or any single piece of it, right? The way that I always look at feedback is that feedback that the community gives to us is a gift, right? It's a gift to us that allows us to make even better games in the future. And so we would be stupid not to pay heed to it, right? And actually make changes where we're able to, where it makes sense to do so.
But
So yeah,
sometimes
I think
it's stuff we can't do.
yeah, exactly right, exactly right. So yeah, so I think our next full event is going to be in September or October, towards the end of the season, probably late September, early October. But we were speaking to the field manager as well, and we are thinking about maybe doing a mini op or mini event at some point in the summer. That would allow us to, test some new game mechanics, maybe test a couple of missions. And he even suggested, which I think was a great idea, to have the result of that op affect the overall outcome of or beginning state of the next one, which I think is pretty cool.
I think it's a super cool idea.
Yeah.
I love from from the tabletop gaming and the RPG aspect of my life. I love campaigns where like the games string together and affect one another, and
Mhm.
doing that from season to season, I think, is a bad idea in the sense that people forget what we did
Yeah,
6 months
yeah,
ago.
totally agree.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, but I think the idea of trying to do that as like maybe we'll try this year for 3, and then if it works really well, maybe we'll try 4 next year, right? Just to try to
Mhm.
squeak like not necessarily all of them being huge scenario games, but like linked gameplay stuff
Yeah.
is a cool idea, and it's definitely something I'm into the idea of experimenting with.
Yeah, so that's all to be determined, but Pat and I are going to start noodling what that could look like. Shorter event format, a little bit more accessible, but fun nonetheless, and like sort of all day activities. So, yes, we'll have more details as we come up with some ideas for that, and hopefully you enjoyed this sort of overview of sort of the event as well as sort of our response to what we're going to do from this point forward. Again, can't say it enough. Thanks to the community for showing up for this game. That is a
We
historic one for
literally
me.
can't do it without you.
Yeah, and it was fun. I think, for the vast majority of players I spoke to had fun. I had fun. The refs had fun. The admins had fun. So, yeah, it's the kind of thing that we want to continue doing in the future, and it's only possible because players are both attending and giving us their honest feedback. So, yeah.
And if you aren't a local player and you're tuning in, thanks for listening. Feedback from you guys, suggestions is super, super welcome on our Discord. Whether you're a new member or a long-standing one, we are, I think getting some experience at running this sort of stuff, but like ideas are welcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's all we got for you this week. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Hopefully, you found this entertaining. Let us know, like Pat said, on the Discord if you have any other thoughts. And that's all we've got for you. So we'll talk to you next week.
Have a great week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.